If you see a cuneiform tablet for the first time, you're not likely to identify it as writing.
Holding a tablet that was written thousands of years ago and being able to read what it says, it's an amazing feeling.
For 3,800 years, it sat in a museum drawer, mislabeled as a myth about a goddess. It has now been translated in full, and it is not a myth at all. A Sumerian scribe wrote down, breath by breath, exactly what is supposed to happen in the first 7 minutes after a human being dies. Not a prayer, not a poem, a procedure. And the strangest part is that modern neuroscience, working with electrodes and dying patients, has just confirmed the opening of it. What the tablet describes after that is the part no one is ready for.
The ancient Mesopotamians, Sumerians, Babylonians, all those people, they wrote on clay. That was their natural activity.
The Berlin signal. Start with the part we can actually measure. In 2017, a team of neurobiologists at the Charité University Hospital in Berlin published something in the journal Annals of Neurology that they had never set out to find. They had 9 patients in terminal coma, each wired to electroencephalographs. And they were watching the monitors when those patients crossed the line we usually treat as the end. Picture that room. The heart stops, the blood stops moving, and the team is sitting there, eyes on the screens, fully expecting the traces to go quiet. They did not go quiet. For decades, the assumption had been simple, almost comforting. The heart stops, oxygen runs out, and the brain powers down like a building at the end of the working day, floor by floor, the lights going dark one row at a time until there is nothing left. That is the picture nearly all of us carry around.
So when archaeologists find them, it is not often that an ancient inscription on a piece of clay comes to light in perfect condition.
That is not what the Berlin team watched happen on their screens. In the first 2 to 4 minutes after cardiac arrest, the brain did not shut down. It ignited. A massive surge of electrical activity rolled across the cortex, a wave of depolarization moving from one hemisphere to the other. Neurons began firing in the gamma frequency range, the exact range that, in living and waking people, carries conscious perception, dreaming, and the active processing of what the eyes are seeing. The dying brain, in its first minutes past the point we call death, was not flickering out. It was working harder than a waking brain. It was flaring. The researchers named it spreading depolarization and described it as an electrochemical cascade, a single moment when neurons dump the entire electrical charge they have been holding all at once. The official interpretation was careful and responsible and completely bloodless, a biological shutdown process. No subjective content, no experience, just electricity draining out of the cells on its way out the door. That is the cautious reading. It may even be the correct one. But here's the thing that should keep you up. 3,800 years before a single electrode touched a single dying patient in Berlin, a Sumerian scribe had already written down what happens inside that exact window. And he did not write it as poetry. He wrote it as instructions.
So this tablet, you can easily see that it's not complete. There's stuff missing here, there's stuff missing there, and it also looks like elephants have danced a polka over the surface.
The tablet. The tablet has a name, or at least a number, CBS 15167. It belongs to the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, part of an enormous hall pulled out of the ruins of the ancient city of Nippur by the Babylonian expedition between 1888 and 1900, and shipped back across the Atlantic before the 20th century had even started. In the museum's own catalog, it is filed as a fragmentary mythological text related to the descent of Inanna cycle, Old Babylonian period, roughly 1900 BCE. That description is accurate in the exact way that calling a surgical manual a story about cutting people is accurate. Yes, the text mentions the underworld. Yes, it references Inanna's descent. Those words are on the clay. But the part everyone glanced at and set aside, the section that fills 22 of the tablet's 31 surviving lines, is not a story about a goddess at all. It is a step-by-step account of what happens to an ordinary human being in the passage between life and death. It is a procedure, and here is where the title number matters, because it is easy to get this wrong. Clinical death is not a single switch flipping off. The brain does not die in an instant. The window in which it can still produce organized, structured activity before it crosses into irreversible silence runs at the far edge. to roughly 7 minutes. 7 minutes is the outer horizon. And what the tablet zeroes in on is the decisive event nested at the very start of that horizon: the first 7 breaths. At an average resting rate, 7 breaths take about 4 minutes. The exact same window the Berlin team watched the brain flare inside. So picture it as a set of nested circles, a roughly 7-minute clinical death horizon on the outside, and inside it, doing the real work, a 4-minute sequence of 7 breaths. The neurobiologists with their machines measured the size of the doorway. The Sumerian scribe, with a sharpened reed, claimed to know exactly what is standing inside it, waiting. He breaks those 7 breaths into 3 phases. He describes each one in order, and he treats the whole thing not as a vision or a belief, but as a sequence of events that happens to you, whether you understand it or not. The great opening phase. One is breaths 1 and 2. The tablet calls it the great opening of the eyes. This is not ordinary sight, and the text is unusually precise about that. It says the dying person sees the room they are lying in, but also sees through it. The walls go transparent. The floor goes transparent. The body itself becomes visible from the outside, and the tablet states it flatly. The person sees their own form lying below them. It would be so easy to read that as the old painting come to life, the soul drifting up out of the body. But the tablet does not call it a soul, or a spirit, or anything mystical at all. It frames it as an observation, a thing that happens at a precise moment in a fixed order to a particular kind of perception.
Signs are damaged or squashed. But nevertheless, this piece of cuneiform inscription is a remarkable thing. This is the oldest map of the world in the world.
And modern resuscitation research has a clinical name for it: the out-of-body experience. In the AWARE study, published in the journal Resuscitation in 2014, roughly 1 in 5 survivors of cardiac arrest reported exactly this: floating above their own body, looking down, watching the room and the people working over them. 1 in 5. Across a gap of nearly 4,000 years, both describing the same first 2 breaths. But hold on to something before we go any further. That floating, seeing through walls moment is only phase 1. It is the gentle part. It is the part survivors come back and describe on talk shows, because the people who reach the next 2 phases, according to this tablet, do not come back at all. If a 3,800-year-old slab of clay quietly predicting the front edge of modern neuroscience is the kind of thing you want more of, take 1 second right now and subscribe. This is the channel that goes to the places everyone else is too nervous to file under anything but mythology. And the rest of this tablet is exactly that kind of place. Subscribe and walk into the corridor with me, because phase 2 is where the door opens. The turning point. Phase 2 is breaths 3 through 5. The tablet calls it the turning point of fate. Here the text introduces a space, and notice immediately what it is not. It is not a tunnel. The thing everyone expects, the long, bright tunnel with the warm light at the far end, appears nowhere on this tablet. What it describes is a corridor, something with walls and a ceiling and a deliberate structure, a built thing. And the corridor has one defining feature the scribe is careful to record: it forks. At the fork, the dying person meets a figure, and it is not the figure you would expect if you knew the rest of the myth. Anyone who knows the descent of Inanna knows Neti, the porter of the underworld, the one who guards its 7 gates. This is not Neti. The tablet uses a completely different term, one that translates as the one who shows 2 doors. 2 doors, one on each side of the fork, and a figure standing between them whose entire function, according to the text, is not to guard them and not to judge who passes, but simply to show them to you. Which raises the only question that matters next. How does it get you to choose?
Has 2 sides. This is the front or obverse, and this is the back or the reverse. And the reverse consists of lots of lines of cuneiform in different ruled sections.
The replay. Phase 3 is breaths 6 and 7. This is the choice. And this is the moment the tablet stops sounding like an old religious fragment and starts sounding like something far, far stranger. Because the text does not tell you what is behind each door. It refuses to. What it describes instead, in unsettling and specific detail, is the mechanism of the choice itself. The gatekeeper does not force anyone through anything. There is no judgment here, no scales, no weighing of sins against a feather, no tribunal of gods deciding where you deserve to go. The gatekeeper shows you both doors and then does one single thing. It shows you your life, not a summary, not a verdict read out loud, a replay. The tablet uses a phrase that translates as he placed his image before him, where the image means the dying person's own life, played back to them as a lived visual experience. Modern near-death research has a name for this too, the life review. Roughly 1 in 4 survivors of cardiac arrest describe it, the sudden, vivid, completely uninvited return of their own past, running in front of them like film. But the tablet adds something the survivors almost never can. It says the replay is not neutral. It says the gatekeeper controls what is shown. And it says the gatekeeper chooses, on purpose, 3 categories of memory above all others: unresolved attachments, unfinished relationships, and moments of intense emotional connection. The text is explicit about why. These specific memories produce a reaction the tablet actually has a name for. It translates as the turning back toward oneself, a pull, an emotional gravity, a force that begins to draw the dying person toward one of the 2 doors before they have consciously decided anything at all. And the door that pull leads to is the one you would never suspect. The trap. The door the pull draws you toward is the door of return. And this is the part that, once you have read it, you genuinely cannot unread. The tablet says the door of return does not lead back to your life. It leads back to birth, a new body, a new beginning, and the complete erasure of every single memory from the existence that just ended. Sit with that, because it inverts everything you assume about a good death. The dying person, overwhelmed with longing, flooded with the emotional weight of the life they have just watched replayed in front of them, reaches for the door that feels like home. And the door that feels like home is a reset, not resurrection, not continuation, a wipe, everything you ever were, gone. The Sumerians did not call this reincarnation. They had their own phrase. It translates as the small incantation of return.
Firstly, there's some lines of cuneiform ruled across very firmly at the top, and this is about the early creation of the world.
And they did not describe it as a gift or a blessing or a generous second chance. They described it as a system, a mechanism built to recycle consciousness through one biological body after another, without ever letting the accumulated experience of a single lifetime survive the trip. The text does not say who designed this system. It says only that it was installed. The second door. Now, the tablet spends 22 lines on the corridor, the gatekeeper, the replay, and the door of return. It spends 4 lines on the second door, 4 lines out of 31. And those 4 lines happen to be the most damaged section of the entire tablet. 3 of them carry partial breaks. The 4th is missing its final signs altogether. Whether that is the ordinary erosion of clay buried in the ground for 3,000 years, or whether it is something else, cannot be proven from the object alone. But intentional erasure is a documented practice in Sumerian scribal culture, and the pattern of damage here is consistent with it. Make of that what you will. What does survive is just enough to establish 3 things. First, the second door is named with a term that fuses the word for to open with the word for the totality of existence, heaven and earth taken together. The door that opens onto everything. Second, the tablet says that choosing the second door requires the dying person to do something very specific during the life review. It describes it with a phrase that translates as to look without attachment, to watch the replay of your own life, every face, every loss, every warm afternoon, and not be pulled by it. Not to reject those memories, not to force yourself numb, to watch them fully and clearly, and simply not be moved to reach back for them. And the tablet is brutally honest about how hard that is. It uses a phrase that translates roughly as, even the gods struggled with this when their forms were new. Third, and this is exactly where the clay runs out, the text says that what lies beyond the second door cannot be described in the language of the living. The only word it offers is a single compound term that translates approximately as completed life breath, not eternal life, not immortality, completion, the end of the cycle, a permanent exit from the system, 4 lines, 3 of them broken, 1 surviving term, and folded inside that fragment is an implication that rewrites the entire tablet, that the corridor, the gatekeeper, the replay, the emotional pull, the door of return, all of it exists for one reason: to keep you from ever reaching that exit. So the trap was never death. Death is only the entrance.
Because it meant for the Babylonians they had a sort of idea of the limits of their world, where they lived.
4 traditions. Now, if CBS 15167 were the only text on Earth that said this, you could close the drawer on it and forget the whole thing. One strange fragment. One scribe with an odd imagination. Easy. But that is not where this ends, because here is what nobody tells you. 3 other traditions, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, describe the exact same machine. Watch what happens when you line them up. Start with Tibet. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, describes the in-between state after death in phases. In the first, you meet a brilliant clear light, said to be the true nature of consciousness itself. Recognize it, merge with it, and you are free of rebirth forever. Fail to recognize it, and attachment hauls you down into the next phase, where visions pulled from your own life drag you back toward return. Sound familiar? 2 options: exit or return. The thing that drives return is attachment. The thing that wins the exit is letting go. That is CBS 15167, point for point. Now, Egypt. The Egyptian Book of the Dead puts you in the Hall of Ma'at, where your heart is weighed against the feather of truth. We read that as a morality test. Were you good? Were you bad? But look at the actual mechanism. The heart is heavy because of attachment, because of the unresolved bonds and the emotional weight you carried with you. Light heart, you pass through. Heavy heart, you are devoured and recycled. Same machine, different paint. And then, the Gnostics. The text dug up at Nag Hammadi, the Apocryphon of John in particular, describe the archons, entities posted in the spheres between the earth and whatever lies past it, who intercept the soul after death and use its own memories and desires to trap it back into the cycle. The archons do not use force either. They use familiarity. They show the soul what it loves, and the soul, recognizing home, walks back in on its own 2 feet. 4 traditions. The Sumerians wrote it first. The Tibetans built an entire training system to beat it. The Egyptians sewed it into their funeral rites. The Gnostics gave the things running it a name. Either 4 separate cultures invented the identical, weirdly specific afterlife right down to its core trick, or every one of them was straining to remember the same real thing. The Michigan Surge Berlin, it turns out, was not the last word from the laboratory. In 2023, a researcher named Jimo Borjigan, working at the University of Michigan, published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Her team watched the brain activity of dying patients, and as the heart stopped, they recorded a surge of gamma wave activity concentrated in one specific region, the temporoparietal occipital junction. That is the part of the brain tied to out-of-body experiences, to dreaming, and to visual processing. And the surge was not random noise. It was organized. It showed coherent, structured patterns of the kind you see in conscious processing. Borjigan chose her words to reporters carefully, the way any serious scientist would. She said the findings suggested the dying brain is capable of organized activity associated with consciousness. And she warned, in the same breath, against calling it proof of an afterlife. She is right to be careful, and I am not going to overrule her for you. The data does not prove there is an experience happening. What it proves is narrower and, honestly, stranger. It proves the dying brain runs one final, organized firing sequence, and that the sequence lights up. Specifically, the regions for visual experience, for memory recall, and for the sense of where your own body sits in space, which is precisely the 3 things CBS 15167 lists in its very first phase: seeing through the walls of the room, watching your own life, perceiving your body from the outside, lying below you. 3 for 3. The AWARE study. Then there is AWARE, and the larger study that grew out of it, the most ambitious research ever run on consciousness during cardiac arrest. It documented something hospitals are not, strictly speaking, supposed to be able to document. Patients who were clinically dead, eyes shut, no measurable activity in the cortex, who afterward reported accurate visual observations of the room around them, things they had no way to see, Details that the medical staff later confirmed were correct. The tablet says the dying person sees the room they are in and sees through it. Aware documented patients who did exactly that. The tablet puts it in the first 2 breaths. Berlin found its gamma surge in that same narrow window. The tablet says a life review follows. 1 in 4 survivors report a life review. At some point, the word coincidence is being asked to carry a load it cannot hold.
We're talking about the imaginative world of cosmology, of theology, of tradition, of inherited ideas.
The drawer. So here is the question that should genuinely bother you. If this tablet says all of that, and it lines up this cleanly with peer-reviewed neuroscience from the last decade, why have you never once heard of it? Here is the history. In 1915, an Assyriologist named Stephen Langdon copied out 4 lines of it, noted the strangely procedural language, and then, for reasons he never explained, closed the drawer and walked away. After that, the tablet earned exactly 1 more mention in over 100 years. In 1983, a visiting scholar from Heidelberg sat with it, and afterward, in a private letter, never in her published catalog, described it as containing material that did not fit any standard genre classification. She wrote that down once, to 1 person, and let it drop. 2 scholars in more than a century, and both of them flinched. When the Penn Museum digitized big portions of its cuneiform collection in the 2000s, CBS 15167 was not included. It stayed in physical storage, undigitized, never translated in full until recently, accessible only by appointment and only to researchers who can actually read Sumerian. Worldwide, that is roughly 400 people. 400 people on the entire planet can read this tablet, and almost none of them have ever publicly said what it says. Maybe the reason is simpler than a cover-up. The text offends everyone at once. It tells every major religion the afterlife is neither reward nor punishment, but a machine. It tells the materialists that consciousness survives death at all. It says you live on, and then you are systematically recycled. It says the recycling is not natural, but installed. And it says there is a way out, while insisting the whole system is engineered to keep you from finding it. No theologian wants to publish that. No neuroscientist wants their name on a clay tablet about the soul. No philosopher wants to argue with a text that calls the afterlife a piece of equipment. So, it sits in a drawer in Philadelphia, waiting for someone willing to say out loud what it plainly says. The system strip away the clay and the catalog number and the 4,000 years, and what CBS 15167 describes is not a faith. It is a system. It has components. It has a sequence. And it has one specific failure mode, the components. A sudden expansion of perception in the first 2 breaths. A corridor with a fork in breaths 3 through 5. A gatekeeper who triggers a replay of your life. And 2 doors, one to a memory wipe and a new birth, one to a permanent exit. The sequence. Perception expands, the choice appears. The emotional manipulation begins, the decision is made, and the failure mode, failure from the system's own cold point of view, is detachment. The system fails when a dying person watches the replay of their life and is not moved by it, does not reach, does not ache to go back. And it succeeds, almost every single time, because the gatekeeper knows exactly which memories to choose. Not your failures, not your fears. The moment you first held your child. The afternoon light in the one room where you were completely happy. The face of the person you loved and never told. The system does not run on fear, it runs on love. It baits the hook with the best parts of your life, and it works every time because no one ever warns you it is happening. That the longing you feel in that moment is the mechanism, not the meaning, and that the door that feels the most like home is the door that erases you. A Sumerian scribe, 38 centuries ago, wrote all of it down on a slab of wet clay, in the same dry voice his neighbors used to log grain. He described a system built to recycle you. He described the trap that catches nearly everyone who reaches it. And he described the exit almost no one takes. Then he left it in Nippur, where it was buried for 3,000 years, dug up by Victorians who could not read a word of it, shipped to Philadelphia, filed under mythology, and dropped into the drawer where Stephen Langdon found it, frowned at it, and quietly closed it again. The 7 minutes are the window. The 7 breaths are the choice. The life review is the trap. The attachment is the mechanism. And the door no one ever warns you about turns out to be the only part that matters. So, I have to ask you, and I genuinely want your answer below. If you reached that fork and the gatekeeper played you your whole life, every face you loved, every room you were happy in, could you actually watch all of it and not reach for the door of return? Could you let it go? Be honest. Drop one word in the comments. Type return. If you know, deep down, you would reach for what you love, or type exit if you believe you could truly let it all go. I will read every single one, and subscribe before you go, because the second door on that tablet is still unread, and you want to be here when we finally translate the next one they buried.